All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining us for another VES-Artex Academy webinar. Today we are joined by Dr. David Reid of Rocky Ridge Consulting, and he's going to talk about how milk quality begins outside of the parlor. Before Dr. Reid gets started, just one housekeeping item. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please type them into the Q&A panel and we will address them at the end of the webinar. And with that, Dr. Reid, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, here we go. We're off. So I was on a dairy here a good number of years ago, and I saw this sign, take care of these cows as if your job depends on it, because it does, and if there's an explanation if needed. So taking care of cows is a pretty big deal on everybody's dairy, and it doesn't matter the size of the dairy or the kind of operation it is, you know. So when we think about milk quality, management's goal should to bring cows to the barn or the parlor as calm and as clean as possible at every milking. This is going to make a big difference to the overall quality of the milk, but also to the quantity of milk. So a couple of things about mastitis, just to get us in the right frame of mind to how we're going to move forward with this. But it's actually a very simple disease. The new infection rate for mastitis, it's directly related to the number of bacteria on the teats when the units are attached. And it's that simple. So I often get calls because people say, well, there's something wrong with my milking equipment. And, you know, my comment sometimes to myself is always, okay, we should have a thing in place that says we're keeping our milking equipment working properly. And if you get an increase in mastitis, you should say, how come my cows have more bacteria on their teats now? But the other thing that's really important is that even the best udder prep is only 80 to 85. And actually most udder prep is probably down on the 60 to 70% reduction in the number of bacteria on the teats during the preparation phase as what those cows came into the barn or the parlor with. So John Dahl, a good friend of mine who's passed away now, used to be at the vet school in Madison. I was also the president of Wilmatic a long time ago. He, at a meeting in Madison, 1992, he said the half-life of mastitis information is at least 50 years. In other words, milk clean, dry, stimulated teats, have a good program for equipment maintenance and monitoring of the performance of the equipment, bring clean cows to the parlor and barn, and then post-dip all cows with complete coverage after every milking. Pretty simple. And when you think about it, and I've said this before, that mastitis in general is a disease of man that shows up in cows. We can manage it. And if we do manage it, we can certainly minimize it. So back in 1974, I took a seminar, and it's interesting. It was way back, I mean, way before we had some of the testing equipment now, the standards. And for those of you that are my vintage, you can see that this was actually a mimeographed 26-page handout that I got from this seminar. But what's important about it is, if you look at it, he described a mastitis, and an outbreak of mastitis on a dairy is that if you took a plank and set it between two sawhorses and continued to put weights on the plank, eventually it breaks. And this is something that a lot of dairy farmers don't think about. So you can have a really good job of your nutrition, your environment can be just immaculate, and you can have some real holes in your management, which is a big weight, but all the other weights from a point of view of milk quality are very minimal. However, on the other side of this is, what we've learned is that oftentimes it's not just your milk quality that suffers, but it's also your milk production. So when you think about this whole aspect of bringing cows to the parlor in a clean, calm manner, it really has an impact on the profitability of the dairy, both from minimizing mastitis, but more importantly, from maximizing production. So Phil Durst was a manager at MSU Dairy, Michigan State, for quite a while, and their dairy at the NMC they've won numerous awards, platinum awards, for top somatic cell counts, and they did it with university students milking cows on a commercial dairy. But he was talking about two farmers, have the same relative somatic cell count, but one works a lot harder. In other words, one guy's culling cows, he's treating a lot of cows, he's maintaining a low cell count, but he's really making a huge effort to do it. And then you have the other farmer that has a low cell count, has a low new infection rate, and everything is really good on that farm. And that's kind of the drift of it. But what the more important thing was, when he's talking about really good milk quality, in particular in conjunction with the dairy that he was on at Michigan State for all those years, You know, I love that. And when he said at the end of it, the pursuit of greatness isn't long, it's just inches, doing more of the little things right on more days. And when we think about when we're bringing cows to a parlor or we're bringing cows into a barn, the cleaner those cows are, the easier it is for the people in the parlor to perform the task and to maximize the milk quality. So think about it. When cows move slowly, they pick up their feet. When they're pushed, they move fast, and then we're going to get significant amounts of manure splash. And so manure splash is something that when we think about it, if a lot of the cows in a parlor or a barn have significant manure splash, then it becomes normal. When it isn't normal, okay? So I have a question for you. Where is the most manure in a freestall barn? Is it the main street alley? Is it the rear of the holding pen? The feeding alley at the intersection of Main Street? So go ahead and take a couple seconds to fill that out quickly, and then we'll see how well we did on it.
Give it just a few more seconds here. We've got a lot of answers coming in quickly.
Well, good. It's amazing somebody can keep track of that in a computer, right?
Looks like we have about 55% of people saying in the feeding alley at the intersection of Main Street, and then 30% rear of the holding pen and 15% in the Main Street alleyways.
Okay. Well, so if I was to look at this and those are all good answers. There's really no wrong answer there. But when we look at it, no, I can't go forward. There we go. To me, it's that feeding alleyway at the intersection of Main Street. That's where you're going to have the most manure. And on many dairies, remember, that's where those cows are coming out, going to Main Street and then moving forward. So to me, when we're thinking about this, we got to look at it and say, is that one of the prime areas where we get manure splash? And it really is. And, you know, pictures get blurry, but I think you get the idea that you have to take a lot of pictures to get these kinds of things going on. So there's another example that someone answer was correct, and that on some barns, the biggest manure is at the back of the holding pen. So this cow is being pushed away from the holding pen, you know, at the back of the rear of the holding pen. But when we see that kind of manure there, we're going to see some issues that we're going to end up having issues with in the barn. So we can see we've got a drainage canal that's over flooded. It's got a lot of sand in it. It's not draining, and we get tremendous amount of manure splash on some dairies. So what's the result? I mean, here's what you see. You're in the parlor. You look at cows. You look at udders. You know, one of my professors in vet school told me one time that if you get water on the top of a teat, he called it magic water, because as soon as you had a liner squawk, boop, it was gone. And now it's down into the milk. And remember that when we have liner squawks during milking, we can have reverse air impacts or air moving back against other teats. And if it picks up a drop of milk, which then picks up some bacteria, whether it's on the teat skin or it's been just blown in there, this is how we're going to increase on the infection rate. And so what's the degree of difficulty when cows come in with this kind of manure contamination for the milk harvest technicians to perform their jobs properly, you know? So I look at manure splash. When you're in the parlor, if it's wet and a lot of the manure is wet, then those cows gut it on the way to the parlor. If a lot of the manure is relatively dry, the splotches on the udder or on the legs, in particular, you can look at the front of the feet, whether it's the rear feet or the front feet. Is that manure really dry? I mean, it may be a little bit wet, but is most of it dry? If it is, then in all likelihood, we're seeing more manure splash on the way out. So look at your cows and then go out and look at where is the area where those cows are actually getting that manure splash. So this is a sand-based dairy. And you look at this and go, well, there's some manure splash, Reid. Yeah, there is. But these cows are really relatively clean. And that's what we want to see. I mean, this is a barn in Kansas. You know, it's a flush barn, sand beds. And you look at the cows in this barn and the cows are clean. And in those kinds of situations, you know, the weight from the cleanliness of the cows on that plank we talked about before is very minimal. There can be other issues on the dairy and you still don't have mastitis outbreaks. And when you see this kind of thing on a dairy, oftentimes the cleaner the cows, that means that stalls are also being well maintained which increases lying time, which also makes for more milk. Oh, natural down position. And everybody's seen cows laying down. And I think most people know how cows get up. Remember, they rock up on their elbows, then they put their head straight down, and then their rear end should come straight up. And the next step is when we see it, cows should do this step up. So one foot comes in front of the other, and then they rise up. So go home and watch your cows in your freestalls. How do they get up? Because in a lot of freestalls, what they do is if we go back a slide, when their rear end is straight up in the air, they just make a sudden sharp move. They roll their weight back a little bit and come straight up with both feet. So in those cases, either the neck rail is too low, or there's some other issue with the stall that the cow can't do the stepping that's normal, like this cow in a dry lot in Texas. Whoop, wrong way, Reid. Where they make that nice step. Watch your cows. And then also think about the fact that if you go out into a freestall barn when cows are being brought to the parlor, and you have to get a lot of cows up, they're telling you something. In most cases, it's that it took them a long time to lay down and they really don't want to get up and go. Whereas you go to a barn that has really comfortable cows, those cows kind of know the schedule and they'll be moving towards that main street area where there's a lot of manure in those street alleys, but they're getting ready to come to the parlor. Cows don't lie. They're incapable of lying. So go read them. You'll see what happens. So they get that karate chop. Can they make that right step? And then what do the bony structures look like? So start looking at cows. I mean, if you look at this, cows are not born with backbones that look like this. These cows have been, and you say, well, there's sand bed in the background there, Reid, I see, and I'm like, okay. Then we have university people telling us cows don't like to lay head to head. You go to a dry lot dairy, and what are these cows doing? They're laying head to head. They got a choice. They can lay anywhere they want. And you can go to any dry lot dairy and you'll see cows lying head to head. Now, you can also say that sometimes those calves, they were weaned together as calves, they're buddies and they're friends for life, whatever. Cows really are not that intimidated lying head to head. So we think about how we design stalls. We need a brisket locator. And people will say, well, cows can get by without a brisket locator and it's better and they're more comfortable and everything else. But then how do you handle, if you don't have a brisket locator to have properly help position those cows, what do you do with the manure that occurs in the back of the stalls? And that's fine if you have 50 stalls, but if you have 500, trying to keep those clean is an issue. And they can sleep with that foot extended. That's that sleeping position. They'll also do the full-blown curl where they roll over. And that's where they get into some problems. So if your freestalls have dividers that come up like this, at least it's not going to contact these bony areas on the back of the cow. And there's some other things we would think about of where we go. So my ideal freestall, and that's actually goes back to Gordy Jones, and he and I have had lots of arguments about this. But so this cantilever stall gets the structure of the pipe away from the hips and the bones of the cows. But the most important part of it is this the dimension that is right here, the yellow arrow. It's at least 18 inches up where that pipe is. And what that does is when the cow lays down, she's actually looking at that pipe. And it actually causes cows to lay straight. And I argued with Gordy and I argued with him. And I finally went back and looked at all the pictures for me, the Fair Oaks or Central Sands. And I finally, the next day I got up and called Gordy and said, I think you're right. So these are Central Sands cows here. But notice those cows laying straight. And so when that happens, the manure is going to be deposited in the alleyway if they pass manure when they're down, as opposed to many other stalls. And then when we start looking at the bony structures on animals, these are California dairies, and there's lots of poor freestalls in California, lots of freestalls that are poor all over. The cows are telling us that there's issues. And when you see hip bones that are really damaged, what does that cost for milk production? I mean, it's huge. And what happens is, here's a perfect example of the hip bones being just mashed up against that pipe. And this cow is not laying straight in the stall. And remember, this side rail is really low, and that's part of the reason. So when we have freestalls where cows aren't laying straight, when they lay sideways, we see a lot of, and obviously this is one stall, but go to look at your stalls. If you see significance of the manure, the most significant place is under the dividers, then the cows aren't laying straight, and you're going to have dirtier beds. And it doesn't matter. In this case, it's organic bedding, sawdust on top of a rubber mat, or sand, or manure solids or whatever bedding you're using. It's going to be a problem because then you're going to have more manure on the cow's teats when they enter the parlor. You also can get the wing of the vertebrae contacting pipes, creates a lot of issues with the cows. And those cows don't lay down as much as they would if they weren't hitting all those things over time. Remember, lying cows down more gets you more milk. There's a fix. This is Gordy's fix. This was actually, I'm not sure if this picture I got from Gordy. I've done several of them, a couple of them in Canada and a few in the US, where we just put 2x6s, upright 2x6s. And if you think your cows aren't laying straight, it's a pretty simple fix. Go put these 2x6s at about the same position as the brisket locator. Do 10 or 12 stalls. And in this case, it's a sand barn. It doesn't matter. Put the upright, then go read those stalls with the cows. Do the cows use them? Easily. And are the stall beds cleaner? And do the cows lay straighter in them? And then decide whether that might be something you want to try in your barn. Because remember, the cleaner the cows come to the parlor, well, that's mastitis you're going to have. Then we look at sand, and we look at the black line in sand, and you know, how deep is it? And you hear all these arguments, and you know, I've heard several people tell me you can't dig stalls, Reid. You can't dig stalls because you dig up that black stuff. Well, when you see this black stuff, and it's that only this deep, you can see my fingers in that picture. And when you reach into that with your fingers, or you may have to take a screwdriver or some type of a tool to dig it, and you smell it, and it's rotten, that's going to create some issues. And when we call it a black line, it truly is black on a lot of dairies. Okay. And then when you don't dig stalls, is this a good sand bed? And if cows' feet don't drop into that sand, it's really not as comfortable as it should be. And you could argue, well, Reid, this sand is pretty clean and it's good for mastitis. Yeah. But if I had deep sand in there, how much better would it be? So the question I ask all of you that have sand beds, because most of you will bed your barns 2, maybe 3 times a week on the upside. Do you know what your cows do immediately after they leave the parlor when there's fresh sand in the beds? If you go watch your cows, you're going to see them lie down quicker on those days than any other day. So what are cows telling you? Cows are telling you that if we had really comfortable sand, we'd lay down more, which is a big deal. But what you got to do sometimes is when you have this really black sand, you got to get it out of there. So you can use these little track hose. You could rent them, or some dairies have them, or you can get creative, as this dairy did up in Minnesota. Really worked slick. It was a homemade job. Basically, they'd push it out. And they had to do a little shoveling. No matter what you do, you have to do some shoveling. But you're trying to get the back 2 feet of sand out, and then refill it with either new sand or recycled sand, and then start digging them. So this is a digger. This was a guy in Canada that I talked into building a digger. And you can see that it's polished up. You know, they get bent a little bit sometimes, but close. This is probably the best digger on the market today. It's made by McLanahan. And if you notice, when you see it right here, these are replaceable, but also they're angled. So and when they drive through the stall, what it does is it turns the sand. And so what you end up with is just sand that's really deep. These type of diggers are usually not very good. So a lot of these in California and other places, but they're not deep enough. Okay. They're pretty good design, except they're not deep enough. And then we see some of these rototiller ones. This was actually one I think I took in China, but there are some rototiller types that get deep enough, but they're really hard to maintain compared to a regular digger. But think about digging sand. It really makes a huge difference. The question is, do you want your cows to lay down after every milking like they do when you put new sand in the beds? You know, what's that worth to you? This is what you want to see. You want to see those cows' feet disappearing into that sand. This is a really high producing herd up in Minnesota, and their sand is like this all the time because they dig it. And when those cows walk in like this, there's 2 or 3 things that happen. One is it's comfortable. 2 is it helps actually, and you say, well, geez, Reid, you're going to contaminate that stall with some manure. Yeah, you are, but it's inorganic, so the bacteria don't grow as well. But what you end up doing is you end up cleaning the feet and cleaning between the toes, so you actually have less of hairy heel warts and those kinds of things that also plague a lot of dairies. So deep bedded sand, probably my favorite bedding. Oh, milk quality. This is a quote from Ron Erskine a few years ago at NMC. You know, the key factor, strict milking protocols. We're not talking about that today, but I loved it when he said unrelenting bedding management and maintenance. So it really doesn't matter what the bedding is, okay? You know, how often do you bed? How often do you dig your sand? If you're using organic bedding, you know, what's the dry matter? You know, you get it too dry, it blows away, but you'd like to see it at 60% or 65% in that range, in the low 60s to 60. If you get to 55, it's probably going to become airborne. And then the real key to using these, when you're using organic solids, so whether it's coming out of a digester or a manure processor or whatever you're doing with it, you're composting it, I don't care. What I see in my field experience is that the dairies that bed a little bit every day have better overall milk quality, and they have better old lying times. And we're getting to some of the dairies now where we've got the right kind of electronic gadgets hanging on them where you can actually look at lying time, and it does make a difference. So unrelenting bedding management. Ask yourself, if you were ever milked in a tie stall barn, how often did you bed the cows? And, you know, the dairies here in Hazel Green that I worked for when I first came into practice in 1973, when the cows were in the barn all the time, they were bedded twice a day. And every time when they went to go milking, they would scrape those stalls and clean those stalls. And even during the day, if they walked through the barn, they'd pull manure off the back of the stalls. So you can look at that and go, that's unrelenting bedding management. That's what we need. How do you keep those beds as clean as possible? Okay, another big thing that we see out there in the real world is overcrowding. So what's the optimal level of overcrowding? Research says will minimize production losses. And there's a lot of dairies that would argue this one. It's probably a pretty open-ended question, but. I think we had the wrong answers there for a minute.
Oh, I apologize. I do not see this question in my
you were
poll.
speaking.
My apologies. We can answer in the chat if anyone wants to type in their answer, and I can respond back.
Or just make note of what your answer is, and we'll move on. Like I said, I've got dairies that do all kinds of things, you know. So if we look, let me go in a minute here. Maybe. There we go. So research that I look at says that somewhere in that 10% range, there's probably some production impact. Now, I can also tell you that I work on some dairies that have significantly more than that, some that are at 30% or 35% overcrowded, and they make it work. But remember the plank with the sawhorses and the weights. If overcrowding is the only real big weight and everything else is really good in a dairy, it can work. Now, it takes a lot of management. And the other problem you have with overcrowding is that you're going to have a lot more manure splash in most cases, because when you overcrowd, you now have less space per cow in alleyways, which means the manure level gets deeper. So how do people manage around it? You know, 3X really makes a difference, because if you're 3X milking, the barn's likely going to be clean 3 times a day. And it also mixes those cows 3 times a day going to the parlor, so they can find beds and feed and do those things that sometimes the researchers say doesn't work, okay? But you got to have things in really good shape as the overcrowding level goes up. I know people do it, but it's probably not optimal for cows, okay? The other thing that you want to be really careful of is probably your close-up areas. That's probably the most critical place to not try to overcrowd. And I know no matter what happens on a dairy, oftentimes we get into a period of time where, for whatever reason, we've now overcrowded that area, and it tends to show up later on with more clinical mastitis. So, you know, we can minimize overcrowding with comfortable beds, minimal time away from pens. So in other words, those cows have a little more time to search out an empty stall. I think the other thing is functional hoof trimming, at least 2 scheduled trims a year, and those overcrowded dairies, it's extremely important, because cows are going to stand more, which then you end up with more hoof lesions that we would see because of that concussive force. And then rubber in the felines to minimize concussive forces is also probably more important if you're overcrowded than if you're not overcrowded, okay? So I had a guy tell me here not long ago, he said, you know, Reid, he goes, I finally figured out that I needed to go home and look at my dairy and look at it as a visitor coming to see my operation. So it's really important that I want people to think about, okay, you've seen some things, we've talked about some things, but what's your first impression of your cows and your housing system? Are your stalls comfortable? Are your cows clean enough? And what's the behavior of those cows as they're in the freestalls, you know? So own and really do this see thing. You got to get past the obvious. And oftentimes on dairies, the abnormal becomes normal. And the first time I ever heard that was also Gordy Jones. That was probably 40 years ago. The abnormal becomes normal. So if all the cows are grade 2 lame, then that's normal. So, but by looking at what's going on, in particular in the back end of your dairy, not in the parlor, it brings focus to the things that you might be able to do better that could help improve both the milk quality and the milk quantity that your cows are given. I mean, simple things. Go home and look at your waterers. How clean are they? Is that a big deal? Go home and look at what other things you could possibly do to move things forward on your dairy. So clean, calm cows, okay? Obviously, that's the goal, but proper cow handling procedures, right? And then it's the bedding management again. Doesn't matter. There's a difference in it from pre-stalls to barns, to tie stall barns, but unrelenting bedding management, okay? And then what's the difference? I mean, think about it. If you had the milk cows in this upper picture on the left, if you're in the technician in the parlor milking those cows, or you're milking a cow on the bottom, I mean, it's a huge difference in your attitude. And remember, it's a disease of man that shows up in cows. So this I was at a meeting, and I never wrote down where this guy had the quote from, but you know, while physical design can greatly facilitate cow performance and comfort, the most important component of cow comfort is dedication to management to calm, gentle handling of the cows. And we have a lot of resources out there. You know, Merck's got these really great videos that Paul Rabnicki narrates. There's others that are out there. There's some of the beef ones that are great. Go get some of those. And the neat part about the Merck ones is they are in Spanish and English. So you can use them. There's relatively short segments, 15 to 17 minutes to review and look at those things. Moving cows properly is a big deal. So I think we had this question come up last time on cow behavior, okay? How do cows first approach handlers or people in general? So reach out and touch you, smell you, or lick you. I guess we'll give you a couple minutes or a minute or so here to fill that out, and we'll see if we agree.
Give it a few more seconds for answers to roll in.
I wanted to vote, but they wouldn't let me.
All right, so we've got 80% of people saying they will smell you, 15% they will reach out to touch you, and 4% they lick you.
All right, well, good. People are actually looking at their cows. So, and I think that's, you know, this is just one of those things that I think inherently we know this, but we need to think about it. Okay, what do cows do normally on your dairy? It always gives me this lag time here. So really, they're going to reach out, or they're going to smell. I mean, they'll straighten their head out and they stretch their neck out and try to smell you. And if you remain perfectly still, the next thing they're probably going to do is they're going to move their tongue out and they're going to try to lick you. And if you still stand still, sometimes they'll push on you. So I think all three answers are correct. It's just what order it actually happens in. So we can't move. Is it going to let us move again here, Annie, or are we locked up, or is it me?
Why don't you try clicking on your middle of the slide?
Ah, there we go. There we go. Okay, so we've kind of talked about it, and it's just one of those things. You know, what do the cows do in your barn? So what do cattle do when they're moved to a new pen, yard, or pasture? And this is one that, you know, we could have made this a question as well, but you know, think about it. What do they do? And my daughter's married to a rancher in Montana, and almost every year where we pull our RV in and keep our horses while we're out there, they turn some yearling heifers into a pasture next to us. Now it's a section, it's 3/4 of a section, so 3/4 of a square mile. And they'll turn probably 115 to 120 heifers in there. And they just wear a path in the first 2 days. They go completely around that whole paddock. And they'll do 2 or 3 passes in the first 2 days just to figure out where they're at. So they know their limit. And cows and heifers in barns do the same thing. So that's normal behavior. What's normal? You put new animals in a pen, they're going to go find the edges of it. So, you know, when cows communicate, it's sight, hearing, taste, smell, and touch. I mean, just think about your cows and what they do. Okay. So, you know, me, stockmanship is that interaction of people and cows. And they're either going to be positive or going to be negative. And everything that I've seen and in the research and my experience on dairies is that cows seem to have long memories. If you're doing things that aren't proper with those cows, they remember, and it makes things worse. So it's low stress, you know, it's relying on minimal use of strategically applied pressure. So, you know, the response of the cows is pretty simple. It's like, what have they had experience with before, both with people and other cattle? And what's that distance between the person and the cow? And are there boundaries, either natural or artificial? And the age of the animals make a difference. And then we could think about this and go, okay, what about cattle want to see you? And remember, the worst place to be is directly behind the cow where they can't see you. Because if you're directly behind a cow trying to move her forward, I will guarantee you that she is eventually is going to stop, turn her head and look at you to try to find out if you're still there. Cattle want to go around you. A lot of people can't understand that one. Cattle want to be with you and will go to other cattle. Okay. So, or be with and go to other cattle. So if you're trying to move animals, if you have a lead animal, that lead animal will generally bring the group with them. Okay. And they like to return to places they came from. Hence the bud box. If you've ever been around where you've used a bud box and it's used properly, it's amazing how well you can load animals into a trailer or a truck or into a chute. When we start doing this correctly, it speeds the processes up and it really relaxes the animals. Cows will follow one another, and just go look at what you see in the real world. Now, this was a dairy on the top, was a grazing dairy in New Zealand. And, you know, granted, they're in an alleyway, but you can see cow paths all over. This is actually from my neighbor's beef cattle place right next to me. And then if you look at what happens when we put just tracks of rubber, this is a dairy in Florida, those cattle will walk on that rubber most of the time when there's no people around. So they have this herding instinct. So they don't like to be alone. Okay. They do have a pecking order, but you know, some people overrate that. And we see dairies now. I mean, I work on some dairies where we actually have pens with 800 cows in them in a dry lot situation. And when they're milking on big rotaries. And, you know, you look at that pen and you go, how can that, you know, I don't know that there's probably several different pecking orders going on there. Light zone, you know, depends on the animals. It can be real small, particularly in robot barns. It gets really, really small just because of the way things happen in a robot barn and how consistent a lot of things are. So there's a pressure zone and then, you know, the balance. So if we're looking at this particular animal here, so that blueling is really the pressure, and we can put pressure on right there. And if we get too far in, we're going to get a real reaction. It works. So if I'm on my daughter's ranch in Montana and we're bringing some cattle, you know, I'm in a position right now. Where am I? I'm at the shoulder of these cows. These cows had kind of meandered off from a group of about 200. And I'm just riding along and I'm in a position to where I'm behind the shoulder. They know I'm there and they're going up. I got to go back with the rest of the herd. You can do it horseback. You can do it on foot. Learn about what the flight zone is, the pressure zone, and remember that blind spot directly behind. So we think about this as we approach and work cattle. So it becomes, it's your position as a person, your timing, the angle, and the speed at which you move. So typically what I try to tell people is put your arms on your sides, no more waving, no more yelling, no more sudden movements, slow and deliberate. And as soon as the animal does something that you want, you back up, you take the pressure off. So you can apply that pressure. And remember, if we're looking at that pressure zone, wherever we're at, if we take and move this person from right here forward just in front of the shoulder, if I go in just in front of the shoulder and I put a little bit of pressure on, the cow stop. If I just back up, she'll stand there. If I move back this way, she's going to move away from me. And one of the things you can do with people in particular that are going to be new on your dairy, and the job may be to bring cows to the parlor, is walk them into a pen of cows and teach them some of these basic things and teach those cows to pass by you. And we'll get to that in a second. So remember, once you see response to what you want, you back off. So in this case, this is a TMF up in Baldwin from a good number of years ago. And Jim's moving a heifer that's getting ready to calf out of the springing pen down to a box stall. And notice his position. He's off to the side of the cow. And you can see she knows he's there. She's actually got her head tipped a little bit. She knows exactly where she's going. Okay. And remember, there's a real important thing about this is that when you're looking at this, it's also your speed. And remember that a cow's comfortable speed is less than your walking speed. That's really important because that gets a lot of people in trouble when they're moving cows. And if we do this wrong, we get cows that speed up. And then if we have a significant manure in the alleyways, we're going to get more manure splash. So position, timing, angle, and speed. Pass by so we can move back and forth along that cow. Okay. So we can get her to go forward. We can stop her. We can move away from her a little bit, which will draw her to us. And then we just go right back by her. And that means she'll go by. We're telling her to go by us. This is the most important thing to train cows to, because this allows people in the holding pen to just have those cows pass by them and go into the parlor. And I don't care what kind of a parlor it is, whether it's herringbone, parallel, or rotary. Doesn't matter. If you have to go out to get cows, teaching cows to pass by solves a lot of the issues. And it's done in a calm manner, and the cows are relaxed. So if you're walking with the cows, you know, we tend to slow them to their normal gait, but remember that people are going to walk faster than cows. So one of the things we do, if we're bringing cows, say this is an alleyway and we're bringing a group of cows towards the parlor, we need to go back and forth across behind the cows. We can walk at our normal speed, but we go back and forth and the cows are going to go forward. This really makes a big difference, and it relaxes the cows and they know exactly where they're going. And the person, notice, hands by their sides, they're not yelling, they're not waving anything, you know. Moving against the cows will speed them up. This comes into play in the parlor more than anything. And we'll show a couple pictures of that in a minute. So if we're going to move them out of a pen, this is a dry lot pen, say, we go in and we make this moving back and forth this way, okay? And then we just start angling back and forth behind them once we get the group to start moving, and they're going to leave. Go and practice this and bring some of your people. It's amazing when people catch on to this. They just think it's the coolest thing in the world because they can move a whole bunch of cows very easily with no yelling, no screaming, and no hitting. So they have long memories, you know. Stress hormone levels are close to the same for an electric prod in the vulva area of a cow as yelling at them. And they're sensitive to high frequency noises. So gates clanging and, you know, the universal milker language, the really loud whistle, that's really irritating the cows. So think about that when your employees are moving cows in the parlor. So, I mean, one of the things I'll do is I just walk in with a pen and stand still. What do the cows do? They should be curious. They should come up. They should, you know, investigate me. The smell, maybe even a little licking. And then when cows are lying and resting, walk into a pen and just walk down the alleyway. What do the cows do? If they've not been mishandled, most of the time those cows are just they'll look at you. They'll lay there and look at you. And maybe a cow or two will get up here and there, but the majority of them are going to stay aligned. If they jump up and bolt, you almost know something's not right with their cow handling. And so this is, again, the TMF. And Jim's walking through cows just looking, and these are, you know, at the heifer pen. And they're so used to having somebody walk through them, it's amazing how calm they are. And if they're calm at this stage before calving, think about how much better they're going to load into that parlor. So think about ways that you can train heifers, in particular, to pass by and be used to people moving in a slow, deliberate manner, and using proper stockmanship makes a huge difference to the manure splash on animals once they get in the milking herd. Then The other one is right after cows are fed, I'll like walk down along the feed lane, just see what those cows do. Are they going to stand there, maybe quit eating, pick their head up and look, or are they going to bolt out? This is actually the TMF again, the pictures I took years ago. And he brought his boy along, and the cows really hadn't seen a little kid like that. But look at the position, the way those cows' heads come up and they look out, and totally normal. And they're used to having people. They just never had seen a little kid. But so one of the ways to do this is to start with heifers, and work with them, walk through those pens on a regular basis, in particular the close-up pens, and teach those cows to move by, work them from the side. That's the most important thing for moving cows into the parlor, but also move them in alleyways by going back and forth behind them, okay? So if you can, try to work heifers through the parlor. If you have any downtime on your dairy at all, try to work those animals through the parlor at least 2 to 3 times prior to the time they actually calve. It makes a big difference. And in fact, if you can get them into the parlor, I've had dairies where on Mondays they bring everybody through the parlor and they don't even put down the fronts of the parlor. They just let the cows in the holding pen, let them lead around. On Wednesdays, they go ahead and put the front gates down, try to load the parlor, and on Fridays they post it. And so they just keep rolling cows through like that, and it makes a huge difference when those animals do calve. So remember, when we move slower, less manure splash, they're more willing to enter the parlor, and more importantly, they'll have a better primary oxytocin letdown. So how you handle those animals is really important. So work cattle quickly, move slowly. Work cattle from the front, draw them to you, and then move by them. Apply the pressure where the cows have a place to go. Train cattle to be comfortable, go by you and stay straight. That's going to help you get them into the parlor down the road, okay? And so if we're behind those cows, we're going to move in triangles in the alleyways, moving them out of the pens. And the best way to do that in many cases is to, if you're raking stalls or cleaning stalls or brooming stalls, whatever you do to stalls, if we just move back and forth across the alleyway behind the cows and you're raking stalls, they know what's going on. They know they're going to the parlor, and they will be way more relaxed moving to the parlor, okay? So if you're doing things with cattle and they're not doing what you want, it's not the cow's fault. It's because we're doing something wrong. So stop and look at what's going on and say, okay, what can I do better to move these cows the right way? They are predictable, and we need to think like a cow. That's the biggest important thing. Remember where their eyes are. Very poor depth perception. They don't like to go across gutters and alleyways that way. Once they're going, keep going, okay? So when I look at moving cows from the living freestall pens, I open the gates to the main traffic alley where I want them to go. Then I walk, usually in the feed alley, to the far end of the pen, and then cross over into the pen and start dressing stalls, working stalls, and moving. And it's amazing when the cow, after a few days, those cows will see somebody walking down with a broom or a rake over their shoulder. They just start moving. They actually get up out of freestalls and start moving, okay? This is really important because it's relaxing the cows, okay? What do you want? You would in this case, if our main street is going to be close to here, we would walk down the feed alleyway, jump in, and start coming back. And in this case, where you have butt-to-butt cows, it's a matter of going back and forth across the alleyway, moving some bedding around on these mattresses, and therefore we'll get the cows to move. Okay. So think about what happens on some dairies. Now, this is a dairy it was in Mexico, I think, but I'm not sure. But look at this dude chasing cows. And, we go to another dairy and we got a piece of plastic pipe in our hand and we're using it on cows. What's the impact of those animals as they move to the parlor? Number one, when they get a chance, they're going to speed up. And when they speed up, they're going to have more manure splash. And the other thing is they're not going to be in the right frame of mind for milking. If they have an adrenaline release within a half hour of the time that you start to begin udder prep on them, they're not going to respond in a normal manner. The adrenaline will override the oxytocin. It'll take at least a half an hour to get out of their system. And, this is an interesting picture. So this is a large dairy in California. and you look, and now they're looking, a couple of cows looking back at me because I stood up on the panel here to get a picture. But what are the cows focused on? The crowd gate is what? It's at least 10 to 15 feet away from the average cow, but they're focused on going into that parlor because they've been properly handled, and they're going to that parlor to get milked. Okay. A couple other things in here when we think about it, and I didn't put any slides in on it, but now's the time of year we should already have cleaned every fan on the barn and get those fans running properly, because we're getting into the weather now where we had 90-degree weather here yesterday, and I think it's supposed to be 87 today in Southwest Wisconsin. So how you maintain your fans also makes a difference, because it's going to increase lying time. If cows are not heated up in the holding pens, they're going to go back with less body temperature rise, which means they'll lay down sooner. Once a cow is heat stressed, they're going to want to stand and they're going to want to pant. So think about how clean are your fans, and is your sprinkler system up and running. I remember a few years ago, before John Smith passed away, he and I were having one of our typical arguments at the Western Dairy Conference. And I said to him, I said, John, why don't you just put hang a digital reader for temperature and an indoor-outdoor thermometer where it doesn't hit the crowd gate at the front of the crowd gate. So I said, if I did that, what temperature would you turn all the fans on? And John was like, he's trying to give me the university answer. And finally he goes, I don't know. I said 60 degrees. And he goes, that's a good one, Reid, 60 degrees. So think about it. If the temperature above the cows is 60, then you need to have all your fans on. And think about what that temperature is relevant to the temperature outside of the barn. And a lot of days that's 45 degrees. As soon as those cows bunch up, it gets really warm. So get those fans running, keep those cows comfortable. Think about shielding to get them in. Makes a big difference. We focus those cows on entering into the barn. Okay. You get aggressive with cows and you're trying to get them into the parlor, they are not going to want to cooperate. They're going to do what these cows are doing. They're bunching away from the parlor. So the entrance of the parlor is right here. And somebody's driven them. And where's their focus? It's on getting away from that guy with a stick. Proper shielding again. What I see for persuaders in barns, here's pipes, VC tubes, pokers, some dairies still use these things, to keep cows from kicking. I always tell people, and this guy was prepared, he had a hammer for the really bad cows. Anyway, so think about it. Once they're started into the parlor, keep them going. Move against the cows, hands at sides, conversational tones, no yelling. Okay. But think about, this lady should be coming back at these cows, but what's she doing? She's doing exactly what most people do, is they get kind of behind the cow and try to urge them to go forward. Whereas what we really should be doing, and again, we're stopping cows. This is a gal, she's actually throwing the units in at the legs of the cows. That is my number one pet peeve to not do in a parlor. Gets the units dirty, gets the cows agitated, and they pass a lot of manure when that happens. So we got something going right here. This is in Japan. She's walking against the cows, but she's still got a stick. Get rid of the stick, just walk against the cows. How bright is it at the end of the parlor? Have more lights, the cows come in better, they're more relaxed. When you have issues like this, we have structures here that are going to impact the bones of the cows. Absolutely no good. Get them out of there. Get them out. On rotaries, there's no shielding, and I would shield this side, okay, particularly here and here, because as cows are exiting, when they begin to exit here, we can have a cow exiting, turn and look right at a cow that's trying to go to the parlor. So shielding is important. His property shielding on a rotary. Same rotary. This is what we're trying to avoid, but we see it. What happens on your dairy? Go look. Unannounced. Take a walk. Walk all over that dairy and see what you can see. Crowd gates. Oftentimes we can automate crowd gates to do things. We can also do some things, and people tell me I'm crazy, but I've had crowd gates where we've taken and put two wires on them. One's hot, one's ground. They're not using the floor for the ground at all. And we'll use a battery operated fence charger. And what happens is when we pull a rope or a control, it turns the fencer on and it starts the crowd gate moving. As soon as you let go of the rope, the crowd gate stops and it backs up for 2 seconds. And you can have a PLC control that can do those kinds of things. It's a huge impact on moving cows in gently. And you say, well, Reid, you're going to shock them. No, you're not going to shock them, because they figure out really quickly, they can sense that there's power in that wire, and they will respect it and they will focus on moving into the parlor. All right, we've been through a whole lot of stuff. Hopefully we're going to have some questions and we'll spend a little time trying to answer questions and we'll go from there. And this is not a Photoshop picture, by the way. The milking equipment dealer sent me this, and it's kind of a grainy picture, but I kind of like it. I think it's the big question.
I think that's a great photo. So our first question is, how often should sand be dug with the deep digger that you showed?
Okay, so I tell people at least once a day. I also have dairies that do it every milking. So there's a dairy by me. It's a small dairy, milks 200 cows. And they dig each milking twice a day. They're now 7 years into their barn. They've never changed their sand. The black line is about 12 inches deep. There is a black line, but it's so deep it never gets to the cows. They've not changed the sand. Every milking's best at least once a day. Okay.
All right. How should we align our team to implement these changes to resolve the presented issues?
So repeat that again. I missed part of it. I'm sorry.
How should we align our team to implement the changes to resolve the presented issue? So I guess what should they really be focusing on to align their team?
Well, to me, one of the biggest things is just cow handling. So if I'm on a dairy, I would be looking at getting some of those videos. If they need the Spanish version, great. The Merck videos are really good. They spend a lot of time trying to teach people about these principles of cow movement, and then go practice with it. Just don't do the video, but take some people out into some heifer pens, for instance, and go work those heifers. And I find it enjoyable to watch the light go on in some people when they're doing that. It's amazing how they just go, wow, look at this. I can move these animals where I want to. Teach them how to move cows easily. So it makes their job easier. It relaxes the cows, and it's going to have an impact on new infection rates because cows will be cleaner if they're handled more properly in the barn. That'd be number one thing I'd work on almost every dairy I go to.
What is the best management of recycled sand?
Recycled sand? So remember that it needs to, whenever you're recycling sand, you're never going to get it as clean as virgin sand. That's fine. What you can do is try to control the moisture level in it, obviously. And I think most people will do that. So you can stack sand, you can pull off the tops, you can restack sand. Trying to keep the moisture down is a big deal. I see a lot of people go and culture sand. So they might even culture fresh virgin sand and they go, why, gosh, it's got, pretty high levels of bacteria in it sometimes. But it isn't so much that, it's the fact that the sand is really comfortable, and it also helps clean those cows. Okay, physically clean them from the abrasion, not the abrasion, but just the action of the sand on the animal. And I'm not too worried about as long as I don't see gross manure contamination in it and the black line is not within the first couple inches, we're probably going to be pretty good. Or the black line's not to where the cow's feet are touching it in most cases. So you have to dig stalls in order to get that done. To me, it's just trying to keep the moisture level down. And most of the time that's just stacking and using common sense on what the moisture level in that sand is.
Would you recommend using lime with sand to kill mastitis pathogens? If yes, how much?
So there's been a lot of work done with bedding additives of different sorts, and lime obviously has had a lot of work. So Ohio State did a bunch of research on this over the years. And basically, if you do use lime and hydrated lime or lime, it's going to tend to dry out that bed a little bit, but the impact of that is minimal. Probably in 12 hours, it's no longer effective. So the recommendation of Ohio State, they're basically saying probably not worth doing in most cases. I would more concentrate on trying to remove any gross contamination at the back of the stalls, in sand stalls or in bedding stalls. I mean, if I have mattresses and organic bedding, I want to have a barn broom like we used to have in a tie stall barn with a bracket on the back with a scraper, either plastic or metal. So you can scrape off a cow pie and you can broom that bed a little bit as you're walking down and try to dry it. Probably more critical there than it is in a sand stall. But if there's manure in the back of a stall, get the manure out. and use that as your maintenance program. Get the manure out as much as you can.
What is your thought on the best training method to get personnel to stop yelling and whistling when they are very accustomed to it?
Well, I think the best way is to try to get those people to do some of this cow, dairy stockmanship stuff in a pen that's away from the parlor, and do it without any yelling and whistling, and show them that if you do things properly, the cows respond really well. And then it's a question of getting them a little excited about seeing how well they can move cows without using the yelling, without waving, and keeping their hands at their sides. And it's amazing to watch people when they figure this out. I mean, they just pray, they go, wow, I can actually do this. Just teach your people how to do it. And if you don't know how, spend some time in those videos and then take them into some of your pens and work cattle.
All right, I am not seeing any more questions, and we are just about at the end of our webinar time. So thank you so much, Dr. Reid, for your presentation today. Very insightful. If you could go to the next slide, please.
Yeah.
So with that, we would just like to invite everyone to join us for our next VES-Artex Academy webinar. It's on Friday, June 10th at 1 p.m. Central Time. We will be joined by Terry Canning of Catalai, and he will be speaking on computer vision, the new frontier in precision farming. So with that, I hope everyone enjoys their Friday, and thanks again.